Hello everyone. Salam, namaste, adab. It's our pleasure to welcome Mr. Aakar Patel, a very well-known personality in India, who was much in news due to his position or leadership at Amnesty International India. Um, and he's a well-known columnist, writer, civil rights and human rights fighter. So for his introduction, we have invited our colleague, Ms. Shanti Chandrasekhar, who is a local professional here, community activist, especially gender activist. And for concluding remark, we have Ambassador Dr. Islam Siddiqui, who is a very well-known activist in our community in Washington area. He has been in a very visible positions in Obama and Clinton administrations. Let us start with Shanti to introduce Mr. Aakar Patel.
Okay. Can you hear me? मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
जी.
अच्छा. Thank you, Razi Bhai, for giving me this opportunity to present the opening remarks for today's session. It's interesting how the brain associates. I'm here to introduce today's speaker, and my thoughts momentarily turn to one of our recent speakers, Professor Raj Mohan Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi talked about the importance of speaking out and speaking the truth, even when it isn't easy. The takeaway from Professor Gandhi's talk, for me personally, was to do something with the fire in your mind, the fire in your heart, as he put it. Today's speaker, Mr. Aakar Patel, is a shining example of someone who speaks the truth and does something about what truly matters to him and what matters to humanity. Many of us feel this pull to do something, to do more, but what and how? Which brings us to today's topic, what Desis abroad can do to help. That draws me like a magnet. और शायद यहाँ जो सभी जो देसीज अब्रॉड कहलाते हैं इस वक्त मेरी तरह यही सोच रहे होंगे, यही महसूस कर रहे हैं कि I'm a sponge ready to absorb the ideas and suggestions Mr. Patel has for us today. Before learning from him, here's my humble attempt to say a few words about him. Considering the volume, the depth of Mr. Patel's work, both as a human rights activist and as a writer, it's hard to even scratch the surface of his work in 5 minutes. His identities and roles include an activist, an author, a journalist, a columnist, an editor, a podcaster. Yes, the list goes on. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something that all of us here are aware of. Mr. Patel has served as Amnesty International India's executive director from June 2015 to November 2019. In addition to these well-known roles that he's famous for, he's also known as someone who's fearless, someone who never wilts under pressure, someone who refuses to look away when freedom is under attack. A writer's voice cannot be stifled or silenced. Mr. Patel has written constantly, unafraid, to hit a nerve, to stand for the power of truth, to defend the fundamental rights of the citizens of India, which includes freedom of religion, and to defend minority groups, including Muslims. Such a display of courage often has consequences. Yet, nothing deters his focus from his work and what he believes in. His recent powerful book, titled Our Hindu Rashtra, What It Is, How We Got You, was published in late 2020. His body of work also includes India Low Trust Society and the Urdu to English translation of Saadat Hasan Manto's nonfiction, Mika Lihito, or Why I Write. Mr. Patel has also translated India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Gujarati writings. Early this year, in an enlightening interview on Bengaluru's Deccan Herald Radio podcast, he discussed Hindutva and other related prevalent issues in India. At the same time, he expressed optimism that the modern world has moved fast towards liberalism. And as he sees it, the movement on this trajectory will continue, provided we fight for it. Now, with the importance of brevity in mind, I've tried to keep my remarks short. One last thing though. Brevity reminds me of what Mr. Patel himself said about Twitter posts. And this is something every writer should keep in mind. He said, you don't have to write a thesis about what you can write in 30 to 50 characters. How well said. It's been my honor to introduce today's speaker, a thinker, a writer, and a doer, Mr. Aakar Patel. With that, Razib Bhai, I hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanti. Very well done. And now it's Mr. Patel's turn to let us know what we Desis can do, and what is your prescription for us.
Thank you very much. And I should say that I've never received a kinder introduction. I think that the words that were said on my behalf and of me were possibly better and kinder than I deserved. I'll speak about two things today. First, the fact is that we in India want to lead the same sorts of lives that you do. People who live in the West take for granted and assume certain rights that you have in terms of the liberties and the freedoms that you have, which we don't have in India. We want to make sure that Indians live the quality of lives that those of you lead in Washington, Ontario, or Madrid and London lead. And I think that the aim that all of us who are activists here in India is fundamentally that how do we better the lives of those Indians, especially those who are deprived, and try and make them as good as, or as close to being as good as those who are fortunate enough to live in the West. The second is I'll try and speak about some specific things that you can do to help all of us. I think that for the first time in the history of our country, and many of you are, you share two nationalities. India doesn't allow dual nationality, but somebody who's born in India, lived in India, no matter the fact that their passport might say that they are, American, that is just a travel document. We are Desis in a large sense and the largest sense. And what is it that we can do to help our country at this time is something that I want to share with you. It is my belief that at this point in time, those of you who are away from us and living in the West especially can do as much and perhaps more than those of us who are here to be able to help and correct our nation and to make it do the right thing. I've got 45 minutes, I'm told. I'll try and stick to time. I'll start by a short background, and this is part of my last book, which says that India is the only nation in South Asia which is not majoritarian by constitution. That we chose a particular direction in 1947 and 1950, and we stuck to it, at least in text. Pakistan does not allow non-Muslims to become either a prime minister or a president. Afghanistan's leader has to be a Muslim as well. The Maldives does not allow anybody other than a Sunni Muslim to be part of its majlis. Lanka, it privileges Buddhism constitutionally. There is a ministry that looks specifically after Buddhism in that country. Bangladesh is more or less as secular as we are, but the constitution begins with Bismillah. Bangladesh has a state religion, which is Islam. Bhutan is possibly the most theocratic nation in the world. There is no nation in the world where religion and temporal power combine in the body of one individual, and that happens in the instance of the Bhutanese king. He is the head of both the Bhutanese state and of the Bhutanese faith, which is a Buddhism in the form that they follow it. Nepal till 2008 was a Hindu Rashtra. In what form was it a Hindu Rashtra? That is what we need to understand. It was a Hindu Rashtra only in one sense. As prescribed by Manusmriti, all of the executive power flowed from a Kshatriya king, which was the Kshetri dynasty. All of the advisory, this was purely, I think, formal and was not taken seriously, but it came from a Mool Purohit, a Brahmin. So you had a Kshatriya king who ruled, who wielded the executive power. You had a Brahmin in the court who would tell the king what to do. This was the extent to which Nepal was a Hindu Rashtra. All of the other prescriptions of what a Hindu Rashtra should be according to the Smritis, which is that, for instance, that the mercantile space should be the preserve of the Vash, or that the Shudra, my caste, I'm a Patidar from Surat, we are Patels, we come from the Shudra caste. We are not meant in Smritic terms to study or to learn. These are not things that can be replicated in the modern world of 2021. So, and I think Nepal knew that. That is why Nepal was limited as a Hindu Rashtra purely to the fact that those who had captured power validated and justified the capture of power based on their caste. They may or may not have taken the advice of the Brahmins, but certainly their constitution said that they did, that there was a Mool Purohit who would advise the king on the great and the large issues, and that was the extent to which it was a Hindu Rashtra. I'll compare where India is today to, I think, our closest brother, and there is some dispute about whether that is Bangladesh or Pakistan, but being on the western side of India, I'll say that it is Pakistan. And Pakistan pursued majoritarianism in a specific way. When they started off, we know of the famous speech that Mr. Jinnah made 4 days before Pakistan became independent, where he said that Pakistan wouldn't have a state and wouldn't have a constitution or laws that would matter to the citizen and their faith. That you could be a Hindu, you could be a Parsi, you could be whatever, and that had nothing to do with the state itself. And that is more or less how Pakistan devolved its constitutional history for the first decade, where debates about what it is that the role of the state should be in the life of the citizen did not involve faith to a very large extent. And their first constitution, which came about 10 years after Mr. Jinnah died, did not have religion to any large extent. Liaquat Ali Khan also died a few months after Mr. Jinnah. But what happened was that the first constitution, 1956, said that only it restricted the office of the president, which was more or less the same as a president here, which is a rubber stamp, would be restricted to a Muslim, but everything else in the polity was more or less the same. It was the Macaulay Code. If you go to Lahore today, or if you go to Peshawar today and you say Dafa 302 or 144 or like whatever, they know what it means, because the laws on the subcontinent are the same, and they have remained the same for the most part. 99% of the laws on the subcontinent, whether you live in Karachi or whether you live in Dhaka or whether you live in Bombay, are the same. The police functions in the same way. Laws are exactly written in the same way that they were in the 1860s, and that has not changed. There have been some changes, which we will talk about. But for the most part, as I said, when Pakistan went into its first constitution and its second under Ayub Khan, there was no great difference between India's 1950 constitution, which said that we will have a state which doesn't look at the religion of the person, we will have democracy of a particular type, etc., and the constitution that you had in Pakistan. The changes came when what Pakistan attempted to do through forming an Islamic state. This goes back to a wonderful speech that Liaquat Ali Khan made to the assembly, where he said that the Soviet Union, the USSR, says it is a democracy and it is a republic, and so does the USA. So what does the word democracy mean in that sense? What does the word republic mean in that sense? And do they have any kind of difference? He went back to Machiavelli and said that the West had secularized so much that the morality of the individual and the morality of the faith and the state no longer seemed to matter to the government. And he felt that it was important that as an Islamic nation, Pakistan bring back morality through the Quran and try and make sure that Pakistan's populace was made better by the government, top down. They tried this in two ways. The first was in the positive sense, that how do we make good Muslims out of our citizenry? And this was tried in a variety of ways, most visibly in the time of Ziaul Haq in the 80s. But it happened throughout. There were sort of attempts. So Bhutto banned alcohol. I should say this as a Gujarati, that I cannot legally buy alcohol in Surat, where I'm from, but I can legally buy it in Karachi, where I went to. So the state functions in weird ways in India. So Bhutto banned alcohol in the 70s. There were also a series of ways in which Pakistan tried to make Muslims better. For instance, zakat, that Ramzan is something that the subcontinent's Muslims follow fairly rigorously. There was no need to impose a kind of Ramzan rule on them, because most of them fast. Many of them even fast as children, and therefore there was no need for the law to have been brought in to suggest that the state had some sort of role in it. But Pakistan did that. So it banned the opening and the functioning of restaurants in the period between, in the fasting period. The other thing that it did was that it tried to enforce zakat top down, which is that at the end of a period, 2.5% would be debited from your bank account. And when the Shias objected, not just the 7 but also the 12 were saying that they paid already to the faith. The government determined that it was okay for people to say that they were Shia at the end of Ramzan, which led to many Sunnis saying that they were Shia, and then therefore the state got into trouble. And then the whole Ramzan ordinance has more or less failed. I think lots of reports over the last years have shown that trying to make the population pious through the state doesn't work. Under Zia, we had the Had Hudud laws, where the state determined that society would become better if we chopped off hands for theft and if adulterers were stoned to death. But Pakistan is a modern nation, and its judges are trained in the Macaulay Code, and they were not able to pass sentences. And to this date, 35 years after Zia sent those laws down, nobody has had their arms cut off or been stoned for the Had Hudud laws in Pakistan. So the laws were fairly useless. The last positive change that they tried to make was riba, that they felt that if we were to abolish interest in the banks, barakat would come down and society would get better. But the banking system didn't want the state to abolish interest, because that would destroy the economy. And what the banking system did was what we do on the subcontinent, which is a subterfuge, and they called interest a profit. And so you can no longer get a rate of interest from a bank in Pakistan, but you can get a rate of profit. So the positive parts failed. You tried to impose Had Hudud, you tried to impose riba, you tried to impose zakat, you tried to impose all of that. What the state then fell back on was the demonization and the brutalization of the minorities. So under Bhutto, you had the Ahmadis who were apostatized. Not too many Hindus left in Pakistan, but the focus of the state became essentially negative. That from the positive side, that we will try and impose a top-down piety, we'll try and make a better state, we'll try and make better Muslims. The focus changed from the Muslims to the non-Muslims in several ways, and we don't need to go into that. I will shift now to India and what India has to offer. So Pakistan became majoritarian by law. my thesis is that India became majoritarian through practice, that the laws existing gave enough space for Hindutva now, and Congress majoritarian impulse earlier. I don't have too many good things to say about what has happened in India before 2014. Um, this changed the way that the constitution and the freedoms that we enjoyed were. So to go to Hindutva first, when we speak about Hindu Rashtra, we should understand that it is essentially a theory of exclusion. It doesn't offer anything to Hindus. So if you were to look at the BJP program of work and say what it is in their manifesto or their ministerial work or their 7 years in office this term or the 6 years under Mr. Vajpayee, that have resulted in social or economic change of Hindus specifically, it would be hard to come up with something. And this is consistent with their 70-year history. The manifestos of the Bharatiya Janasangh, which is the predecessor to the BJP, they promoted mechanization in 1951, then they opposed mechanization in the agriculture sector in 1954, because that would lead to tractors, which would mean that bullocks would get killed, and they didn't want that. They were fairly socialist for 20 years. Under Mr. Vajpayee, the Bharatiya Janasangh wanted a cap on the income of all Indians at rupees 2,000. It wanted a cap on the land that Indians could build homes on at 1,000 square meters. These are not the sort of things that we associate the BJP with. We tend to think of it these days, for the last 10, 15 years at least, but certainly these days, as being this laissez-faire kind of open-minded market economy, Ambani, Adani, etc. But the text that they hold, the text that they own, the text that they have promoted all these years has been fairly socialist in nature. And the reason for that is that the RSS doesn't really have any kind of economic ideology. It can have the Swadeshi Jagran Manch exist very comfortably with the laissez-faire policies of Mr. Modi, which said we should privatize Air India, we should sell off all the oil companies that Nehru built, and so on. There is no coherent center to the RSS and its agencies, including the BJP, which would suggest that it has an ideology in the sense that the word ideology is actually understood. What it does have is a hatred of Muslims. And so this is the core of what the RSS holds. And this, both the RSS and the BJP agree, is what they should be doing. Deendayal Upadhyay ji, when he spoke in 1965 in Pune, said that the aim of the Hindu polity should be to defeat the Muslims politically. These are his words. He said that is what India should aspire to doing. We should defeat Muslims politically. What should we do after we have defeated Muslims politically, or why are we defeating Muslims politically? That he did not talk about. That we don't know. He did not write anything. This is one of the other issues, that because Golwalkar ji and Upadhyay ji never wrote any book, they only made speeches. We don't really have anything at length on what their particular or specific ideology is. We have only glimpses, which is based on things like I'm talking to you now. I could say anything and it could come out in terms of a philosophy. And this is how they actually function. That they did not write at length because that would require either too much work or it would require too much brain. But what they did was they focused on speeches, which would then be converted into books. So Deendayal Upadhyay in 65 said that the aim of the Hindu polity in India should be the political defeat of Muslims. This is what I think Mr. Modi has actually achieved substantively in his time. That we've got 303 Lok Sabha MPs from the ruling party, of whom none is a Muslim. In 2014, we had 282 MPs in the Lok Sabha from the BJP, none of whom was a Muslim. Today, in 15 states in India, there is no Muslim minister. In 10 states in India, there is one Muslim minister, usually given minority affairs. In India's largest state, UP, even the minority affairs portfolio in the cabinet is held by a non-Muslim. Things such as Waqf and so on are handled by a non-Muslim in a state that has been influenced very strongly by the Muslims. Pakistan doesn't have a single Hindu chief minister in its 4 states, but India doesn't have a single chief minister in its 28 or 29 states. So whether the exclusion is by law, as it is in Pakistan, or by practice, as it is in India, the exclusion is real. In one instance, the exclusion doesn't have the benefit of subterfuge. I think in Pakistan, they are quite clear and open about the fact that they are a state that is of a particular, that is bent towards a particular faith. In India, there is a pretense. We pretend that we are secular, but the practice of the state and the practice of the people who hold the power in the state is very, very different. This is accompanied by the slur that Muslims are being appeased. That there is no data that we have that shows this. If you look at the government data that the government itself has put out, I told you what the data was on a parliament and on politics in the state. But if you look at data on the employment of Muslims in the government, if you look at data of the employment of Muslims in the army, RAW bans Muslims. No Muslim can join RAW, and this has been reported before, and it's a fact. In all of the higher intelligence services, including the fairly lowly placed intelligence bureau, there is today at the officer cadre one Muslim who is in the IB. If you look at RAW and the IB and the NTR and so on. So that this is exclusion by default by the state, which actually pretends to be secular, and where the narrative is that the Muslim is being appeased. We have no data to show this. It is hard for a Muslim in many parts of India to rent a flat because of her faith and her name. But the claim that we make in politics is that of appeasement. So the BJP's aim, as I said, according to itself, is the political defeat of the Muslim. The question arises, after that what? Once we have to, I would say that it's a fact that today India's Muslims have been politically defeated. That there is no, I would argue fairly strongly with anybody who would suggest otherwise. That I think that Muslims are on the defensive, even though they hold less power today than at any other time in our history. They're always defensive, and they have to defend either something that happened 600 years ago, or what they eat, or how they dress, or what they speak, or their script. It doesn't matter what it is that they do. There is always another excuse, another reason found to brutalize them. And I think the government is fairly good at developing laws at doing that. We'll just go through a few. The NRC, we have introduced religion into the state for the first time in our constitutional history. Before the NRC came in and the CAA came in, we did not have at any point in our history religion as being the criterion for citizenship. The CAA, to which the NRC is linked according to the Home Minister, Mr. Shah, is the first time in India that we have said that only refugees who come from 3 particular states, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and come from 6 specific faiths that exclude the largest faith in those states, will be allowed to become citizens, assuming they came in before the end of December 2014. We had never before this time used religion as a filter to determine what it is that a person seeking citizenship should or should not be. In Kashmir, I think we've done something which is based purely on the fact that the majority of its citizens come from a particular faith. We purport to follow common law, which many of you in the US follow as well. But we chose not to use things like habeas corpus for Kashmiris. So what is a foundational element for the law in terms of what the freedom that is enjoyed by the individual vis-a-vis the state is, we chose to ignore. I think the other thing is that we use methods and weaponry in Kashmir that we don't use anywhere else in India. When the Patidars rioted, which was a few months after Mr. Modi took office, The paramilitaries did not use pellet guns on them. Those of you who live in the US will be familiar with the 12 gauge shotgun. It fires birdshot out of shells that are this long, and because the barrel is not rifled, the shot disperses very widely, extremely quickly. The paramilitary uses this freely in Kashmir. We have blinded about 1,000 people there. We have killed some. This is a weapon for crowd control, not used anywhere else in India, no matter how violent the crowd is. This is how we think that Kashmir needs to be integrated with India, with a different set of laws and with a different weapon. Love jihad. There are a few laws, I don't know how many people know this, that where India has reversed the burden of proof. If I were to murder somebody and their corpse was next to me and I had a gun in my hand, it would still depend on the state and the police. They would have to prove that I killed that person. If instead of the person there is a dead cow, it is the person who has to prove to the state that they are actually innocent. We have reverse burden of proof. It's happened across a series of things. But with cow slaughter, it started first. And it started before the BJP, I should say this, that this is sort of fundamentally a Congress law. The fact is that what the Pakistanis did through honesty and openness, which is that they looked at certain laws and said that these seem to go against what our interpretation of faith is, and we are going to either strike them off or write them in. India has done through subterfuge. So ostensibly, cow slaughter is an economic crime. If you look at the constitution, the recommendation is that because the cow can produce economic value, it should be preserved, and its progeny should be improved upon in breed quality. Economic crime. There is no economic crime in India that has a life sentence. In Gujarat, cow slaughter has a life sentence. Burden of proof is reversed. Not only will you get a life sentence, you will need to prove to the state that you did not kill that cow. There was a person convicted in 2019, a Muslim man, obviously, who was accused of serving biryani at his daughter's wedding a few months ago. The accusation was that the meat served in that biryani was beef. The FSL, the forensics laboratory, said we don't know whether it was beef or not because it was too long ago. The court sentenced him, saying that if we cannot prove it, it's your job to prove. It is the Muslim is guilty at birth in India. The Muslim is guilty of being Muslim and therefore will be convicted for crimes like this. And it happens. The reason why I don't know how many people know this, but beef lynching, the murder of Muslims because of the accusation that they possess beef is post 2015. Mr. Modi ran his campaign on the Pink Revolution, insisted that states ban beef. There's a difference between banning cattle slaughter and banning beef. What happened in 2015 was the banning of the possession of beef, not cattle slaughter. Cattle slaughter was banned already in Maharashtra and Haryana. The two states which responded to Mr. Modi's call, they banned beef. Immediately the lynching started, which you might expect. This is the subcontinent. The rule of law is low. If you tell the citizenry that somebody is guilty of doing something and the state will determine whether they are actually innocent or not, rather than somebody is innocent and the state will determine whether they're guilty, will result in street violence. We should not surprise any of us that Muslims started to get murdered on the streets of India publicly, with people holding up cell phones recording their murder, because the Prime Minister did this. He's responsible for their deaths. There is no question that there are no two ways about it. There is no recorded data that tells us that this category of crime existed before this happened. So this is what we are doing. We are doing under the BJP, not something that Pakistan did, which is try and improve its state for its majority. They failed, but they tried. We are not trying that. We are just going after our minorities because that is what Hindutva essentially is. Love jihad has a reversal of burden of proof. If I, as a woman, marry somebody as an adult and I change my faith, it is not my word that the police will take. If I say that I have converted out of my belief because of my love, it doesn't matter. It is the people that I marry and that family that will have to prove to the satisfaction of the state and the police that I have done so without coercion. You can imagine in our part of the world what that means in terms of corruption, what it means in terms of violence, and we can see that happening across the states of northern India. Triple talaq. A Muslim man is the only individual in India on the subcontinent who is criminalized for a civil wrong. If I tell my wife talaq 3 times, our marriage is not dissolved and it is not a crime. If a Muslim man says that to his wife or is accused of saying that to his wife, marriage is still not dissolved. The Supreme Court has struck down triple talaq. It is not lawful, but it is still a crime. This is what we've done. We have criminalized the civil wrong purely because we want to persecute Muslims. There is no other intent. After the Supreme Court determined that triple talaq's utterance in one sitting was unlawful, there was no cause to frame a law and pass a law which criminalized the action other than to victimize Muslim men. This is the only purpose of the law and for which it is and will be used. I'll very briefly talk about laws that existed which were anti-minority before the BJP. One is propagation, that the Christians were very specifically promised in the Constituent Assembly that you will be given the right to propagate. As you know, Muslims on the subcontinent, or as you may know, Muslims on the subcontinent do not do a propagation at the mass level. Even the Tablighi Jamaat seeks to make better Muslims out of Muslims. It does not speak to me. It does not come to my door and say, Kalma bolo, or like, whereas the Christians, they believe it's an article of their faith to be able to spread the good word of Jesus and to try and bring people into the faith. The Constituent Assembly knew this. That is why Article 25 specifically gives them the right to propagate, which has been dismantled. Today in India, you cannot change your faith. In Gujarat, my state, if you want to convert out of your religion, you have to send an application to the district magistrate. You have to give your name and address, your monthly income, the names and the addresses of your family members, your caste. You have to tell them why it is that you want to convert. You have to tell the government who it is that you have invited to the ceremony that you want to be converted in. You have to give them the place where this will happen. The district magistrate or the collector, if you live in the city, will determine whether or not it will let you convert. Half of the people, this is from a report in 2019, half of the people who applied were denied. All of the people who were sort of allowed to be converted were Dalits who were seeking to convert out of Hinduism into Buddhism. To assume that there is religious freedom in India is a fraud. It's a lie. You cannot do it. It is true that in some states you can. The South is generally more civilized than the North. But every state in India in the North, especially under the BJP, are adding more and more laws, just like the one I read out to you, which make sure that you have no freedom of faith. This is a fundamental right, by the way. This is it should be as precious to us as the right to bear arms in the US or the right to free assembly in the US, but we don't have it. This is a fact. But the pretense is that this is a law which Indians have, and it is a freedom that Indians hold. That brings me to my last point. I have another 5 or 10 minutes on what you can do. What is it that we can do to convince the Indian state and pressure it into doing the right thing? I think that my view is, people could disagree with me, that we have gone into a space where it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to. I have not spoken about the economy now for a reason, because I want to separate the two. I don't think that the two should be mixed. But I think that generally speaking, we are in very big trouble as a nation, and it will take a lot to get us out of it. Frankly, I don't know whether we can. But there are 3 things that we can do here. One is vote. The other is go to court. And the third is protest. Of these 3, the first has become slightly difficult because I think in the last 6-7 years, India has come under in parts of India, there is a majoritarian wave which is very hard to resist. It's very difficult to live here. The courts have become, I think, what they've always been, which is pliant to the power. That if the power is X, they will go that way. If it's Y, they will go that way. We have got protest, but protest is very difficult unless you've got lots of people. The two shining examples of successful protests in India today, I would say, well, three actually. I would say one is no CAA. I think that Muslim women stopped the enforcement of the CAA. Definitely they blocked the NRC because of the quality of their protest and their strength. I would say that the farmers have pretty much, in my opinion, killed off the farm bills because of their resolve. The third is Pathalgadi, which has to do with a specific state, so I will not get into it. But if we ask ourselves, why is it that, say, why did Kashmir get internet in the first week of February 2021? It was denied to them for a year and a half. Why did it get it then? Why is the CAA a law that was promised by Amit Shah, passed by Parliament, sanctified? This is a law, this is legal status, not yet applied in India. Why is there no NRC in India? I think we need to think about that, and we need to think about it as activists. My view is that the Indian government is vulnerable in some ways. The primary vulnerability is that it pretends that it is secular. If it said, if Mr. Modi said to the world, we are a Hindu nation, the Muslim and the Christian are second-class citizens in our country, the world would sort of engage in India in that sense. It might still pressure India in some ways, but there would be clarity. Mr. Modi doesn't say that. Mr. Modi says that India is secular, whatever the preamble says, socialist, secular, democratic, and so on. And that is what the Indian foreign officer is trained to do. When she defends India in Brussels or in Washington, doesn't say that we are a Hindu Rashtra. She doesn't say that we are a Hindu state. She says that we are secular. That is vulnerable. And we need to use that. We need to exploit that vulnerability because it's a lie. It's a lie not in the sense of the text that they're talking about, but in the practice that they follow in our country. In late 2019, there was a resolution that was written up in the US Congress, in the House of Representatives. It's called HR 745. It looks at Kashmir. Pramila Jaipal, who is the chair of the Progressives Caucus, she wrote it. She's the author. It said that what India is doing in Kashmir is wrong, borderline a criminal, and that the US should act on it. That congressmen and women should vote on the fact that they feel that what India is doing to Kashmir is wrong. India was disturbed enough by that motion for the Foreign Minister of India to refuse a meeting with the Foreign Affairs Committee because it included her in it. And the Foreign Affairs Committee, to their great credit, though it was bipartisan under President Trump, said that they would not accept blackmail from the Indian Foreign Minister. And therefore, they chose not to leave her out of the meeting. Jaishankar ran away. It tells us that there is pressure that works. If there's pressure that works in that sense, it is those of you who are there who are able to build it up more than those of us who are here. We can supply you with the material of our trauma, but I think it is essentially dependent on those of you who are there who can build sufficient pressure state to state on the government of India, forcing it to behave. Similarly, one reason why I think that the CAA is not yet law in India, no refugee from Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Bangladesh has been given citizenship under CAA because the rules have not yet been notified. And one reason they have not been notified is that there is a motion condemning the CAA in the EU Parliament. And it's a very strong motion. I would urge those of you who've not seen it to read it. It was not voted on. It was tabled, and the compromise that they reached with the government of India, we are told, is that they would still table it, but they would not vote on it. I'm told that the motion is dead now. but they didn't vote on it because the government of India felt panicked enough to ask them to hold off the vote on it. What that tells us is that outside of these three things I told you about, which is vote, court, and protest, there is something else we can do, which is advocacy. We can advocate to the rest of the world to ask India to follow its constitutional values. If we believe as a people and as a government and as a state that we are secular, we should follow the norms that we have held for ourselves. And there is nothing wrong in Desis abroad, whether in Washington or in Brussels or in London, to approach those points of power they feel should be used to force the government of India to behave in the right way. And I think that we need to do this in a coordinated way. We need to do this in a strategic way. We need to do this in a way that civil society in India that cares about things like Kashmir, that cares about things like CA, that cares about things like the right to propagate and such things that don't make the news often, is coordinated with those of you in the US, those of you in Europe who have access to those people who we may not have access to. And I think that if we broaden this movement, there is a hope we have. It might not be be much more than a slim hope, but as this is, we should try. Our country is in a space where I don't think that we can afford to sit back and say we will watch what happens. What has happened in the last 7 years has happened fairly quickly. I don't think we have another 7 years. So if we can get together and coordinate and make sure that the world asks India to do the right thing for Indians, we will help our country and our countrymen and women in a way that we have not been able to do in the past 30, 40 years. This would not have been possible 40 years ago. Now, because of social media, because of the fact that many of you, that there's so many of you there in the West who can actually be influential in their politics, but still retain some sort of sentiment for us. That is what makes the important difference. That is broadly what I wanted to say. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Aakar Saab. Really, it's a very depressing situation there, but some of the prescriptions that you have told us, I think the right person is our next speaker for concluding remark is Ambassador Islam Siddiqui Saab, who is very much active on these lines. And I think it's the right time for him to express what we can do, what he's been doing, or what the discussion tells us to do. Islam bhai.
Thank you very much, Aakar and Razi Saab. I think I agree with Razi. It was depressing, but it was an excellent presentation. I really applaud the scenario you painted, Aakar. This last summer, actually, we have heard a number of prominent Indian journalists and thinkers and intellectuals. And I think what you have done, you have brought a nice summation what the situation is, number one. But you went one step further, and that was what we can do, especially Indian diaspora, who actually still are well connected with the country of our birth, our motherland. And we are very much concerned about the situation there. So I think, Aakar, the way you painted the scenery scenario about India, I think that actually leads me to believe, my conclusion is India was a shining city on the hill for the last 70 years, where although it was not perfect, just like in American democracy is not perfect, and it became even more tainted under the 4 years of Donald Trump rule. But thank God he's gone. And so we are back on track with Joe Biden. So I personally think that your points about voting, I think that's what brought about the change in America. And I think this is what, if Indian public wakes up, they can do that in India. In the elections being held in 5 states in India, I hope to see the results are an expression of public's disgust what the BJP government is doing at the center and at the state level. You also talked about the second was sports. That's also important, and I'll come to that in the protest. So, but I think let me go back. I think you're painting the scenario when I said about India being the shining city on the hill. I grew up in India of Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Maulana Azad, Dr. Ambedkar. I remember with my memories are of those days where, although there were occasional riots, Hindu-Muslim riots, but the Indian government, by and large, brought out the law and order. Your commissions established, at least there was an effort to investigate what went wrong and what was done. But I think the government did not still follow the basic rules of the Indian constitutions in terms of being a secular democracy. I think what you brought to the front, I think this is commendable, and I had not heard this thing. This quotation from Deen Dayal Upadhyay about defeating Muslims politically. To me, this is I think has been brought off and on. But what you have said is actually should wake up every one of us, Indians of all faiths, not just Muslims, Indians of all faith, that this is not the India we want. I believe that India's reputation around the world is based on an account where we have large balance of in terms of pro-India sentiments, because we are the world's largest democracy, by and large secular, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. And guess what? That dream of Dr. Ambedkar and the founding fathers of modern India is under attack. And I think this is what we have heard from other speakers. Democracy in India is in danger. This word Apurva Nand said, some of the other speakers we heard. So you have pretty much confirmed, but you said something else, what's going on, that being a Muslim is actually doesn't have a chance in the court and judicial system because of some of the laws which are being passed since Mr. Modi and the BJP came into power in 2014, and then he was re-elected. So I think that was also this a call for someone to think about, can the 200 or so million Muslims, should they just stay idle there? But I think we also need to raise the same question about the Indian diaspora. I think we as Indians here, people of all faiths, including Hindus and Muslims and Christians, we want to be treated as in this country as a minority, which with all full rights equal to the white Americans. But I think I want to ask the questions of Hindus in this country, Hindu Americans. Are you not going to grant the same rights to Muslims and Christians and Dalits in India? So I think when they talk about some hello, Black Lives Matter, I think you heard this thing quite a bit in India, support for that. I think we need to realize why you're not also following the same, giving the same rights to Muslims and Christians and Dalits in India. I also think that your reference to Modi's action on August 5th, 2019, to essentially take away the special status of Kashmir, the only Muslim majority state in India, I think that was a part of the RSS promise and agenda for a long time. He delivered that to RSS, and I think this is part of the RSS roadmap to essentially marginalize Muslims in India. So that's the other thing. I fully agree with you that there's a reason why this persecution of Muslims has been going on and will continue. And most alarming statement I think I found, Aakar, in your talk was Muslims are guilty at birth. This to me should be a clarion call to every one of us. And this is where I thought Rajmohan Gandhi's quotation, which Shriyap said, I think we all need to be in the face of this tyranny in the turning India from a secular state into a Hindu nation. I think this should be of concern not only to diaspora Americans, but even Indian diaspora Americans, but it should be of concern to all Americans, because as a strategic ally of America, we want India to uphold uphold this obligation under international law for human rights, freedom, justice, and equality. And by the way, I don't need to tell you in this audience, I think the Indian Constitution and American Constitution has a lot of similarities because the founders of India, modern India, looked at that, the Constitution, and they essentially borrowed the Constitution, the world's longest democracy, and now that is enshrined many of the same features in the world's largest democracy. I think now I'll come to the proactive stance you advocated, and this is my experience of 55 years. I have been an activist of this 55-year journey since I came from India. I was a student activist. Then in the Vietnam War, I worked in protest in California, where I used to work, my first job. And then in government for the last 30 plus years, in the state government for nearly 28 years, and about two administrations. One thing I saw, and I think this is a very, very common phrase that you hear, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. And I think this is where I have always practiced that we have to be politically active. And Raj Mohan Gandhi said, I think we have to be activists. We cannot and tell the truth. So I think these are the two of the principles I will enunciate, and I'll close. I think you said that we should be proactively working with in the halls of US Congress, EU Parliament, and UK parliaments. And now since UK is out of the EU, and I think there's a value. India is your comment. I 100% agree. Indian government is vulnerable. I can tell you, I was negotiated face to face with the Indian Minister of Commerce and Trade, Anand Sharma and Kamal Nath before, and also other Indian government officials during my time in the Clinton administration. And I think they understand the power India wants to. Mr. Modi wants India to be liked and loved by peoples around the world. And I think you cannot ignore. And I think this is why it's very important that we shine the light on what's going on in India, tell the truth, like Mr. Gandhi, Rajmohan Gandhi has asked us to do. And so I think all of us, freedom is not free. All of us have to work in whatever capacity to help us and do this thing. I'll just go very quickly. One is create if not the global, at least create a US, EU, UK, a coalition of like-minded people where we can publicize what's going on in India, and that should not be acceptable to the Western democracies, number one. We should also work with other, the journalists and brave journalists, I must say, and as well as the human rights activists and academicians and intellectuals in India who have the courage to speak out, like yourself, Aakar. And I was talking to your colleague, Salil Shetty, just last week. By the way, he asked me to say hello to you. So I think we need to work together with Amnesty International, other human rights organizations to expose India. So, and again, I make it clear when I give my talks, we are not against Hinduism. We are not against India. We are against the wrong-headed policies of the Modi government and BJP and RSS. So I think those are the three, and RSS agenda must be exposed to the world. This fascist agenda has no place in 21st century India or in the world. So I think this is where we should emphasize those values. And so in terms of politically activism has to be the part. I think I see something which is happening. There's an organization I'm working with, Hindus for Human Rights, Raju Rajgopal, Sunita Vishwanathan. Then there's a SAHI, which is the Students Against Hindutva Ideology. So a number of campuses in the US, there's a group SAHI, which is very active. So I think we should be in alliance with many of the groups, both domestically in the US and internationally. And fourth, we should work with US member of Congress, and which we are doing right now. We have been in contact with members of Congress on these issues. We are working with the US Commission on international religious freedom, which put India for the first time last year in 2020 as a country of particular concern, denying human rights and international religious freedom. And also finally, we should work with organizations like United Nations and other human rights international organizations to again document all the atrocities which are going on. I know I work with the Christian American groups here where people are, these thugs are walking to Christian churches and asking people, forcing them to recite Hindu slogans and all this. So I think this is also anti-conversion laws and some of the things you alluded. So I think your suggestions I embrace for political activism and also exposing India's conversion or departure from democracy into a theocratic state. And I think this is where those of you who are listening to me, if I'll consider what Aakar and I have said is, please think about it. We should not accept what is going on in India, I think, and do whatever we can do, either by supporting those of us who are working, those of us who are all these intellectuals, Siddharth, Vararajan, and all Apurva Nand, and all the other people who are working bravely to expose what's going on in India. So I think that's one, and also we should do as much helping, working with Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, Congressman Ro Khanna, and others. I think just one example of political activism, just like you said, before Secretary of Defense Austin went to India, he had received a letter from the new chairman, Bob Menendez of Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and some of us had provided information to him what's going in India. And I'm so thrilled that Senator Menendez had actually asked the same thing. India should leave its constitution and human rights obligations. And he expressed concern not only about the situation in Kashmir, about Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs. So I think this is where you are right on the mark. I commend you what you're doing, and we are with you. And please tell you folks you are working with India. I think we are watching very closely what's going on. I think that what's going on under the RSS and Modi agenda should not be acceptable in the 21st century.
Thank you, Islam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Islam. It was well explained, and I think this combination is what is needed. Aakar Patel or other activists and people like you or organizations like yours coming together and putting international pressures, giving information to Congress and at Capitol Hill, and other organizations like us joining hands. So this is very well coordinated effort to do as much as we can. So before we go to a moderated question answer session, let me introduce you the next Saturday's talk. Just to remind everyone that since after tomorrow, we have this Ramadan coming. So for the entire month of Ramadan, we have switched the gear not on religion, but on Muslim thoughts and the literature. And so we have invited very famous 4 scholars on every Saturday to give a talk. So the first in the series will be Professor Jonathan Brown, who has done remarkable work at Georgetown University. And he will be talking on South Asia in Islamic thought. And the timing has been changed a little because of the Ramadan, Iftar and all those times in India and Pakistan. So just remember the poster will be coming. And so 4 consecutive such lectures will be on Islamic thoughts